Well, for God's sake, look who's here, bawled Miss Barrows. And her braying laugh rang out like the report of a shotgun. He rushed past her like a football tackle, bumping her. "Hey, quit shoving," she said, closing the door behind him. They were in the living room, which seemed to Mr. Martin to be lighted by 100 lamps. "What's after you?" she said. "You're as jumpy as a goat." He found he was unable to speak. His heart was wheezing in his throat. Yes, he finally got out. She was jabbering and laughing as she started to help him off with his coat. No, he said. "I'll put it here." He took it off and put it in a chair near the door. "Your hat and gloves, too," she said. "You're in a lady's house." He put his hat on top of his coat. Miss Barrows seemed larger than he had thought. He kept his gloves on. "I was passing by," he said. "I recognize. Is there anyone here?" Stop. It's interesting that she wanted to take his hat and gloves and coat off, and he does it himself. He takes his coat off, puts it by the door, takes his hat off, puts it by the door, but he leaves his gloves on, and he's looking around the house, and he even goes as far as to ask her if anybody is there. This is that climax. This is when we're building up to it, because he's going to eventually come to the point where he's going to have to do something, okay? She laughed louder than ever. "No," she said. "We're all alone." "You're as white as a sheet, you funny man. Whatever has come over you?" "I'll mix you a toddy." Stop. A toddy is a drink. It's like whiskey and lemon, I think. Okay. She started towards the door across the room. "Scotch and soda be all right?" "But say, you don't drink, do you?" She turned and gave him her amused look. Mr. Martin pulled himself together. "Scotch and soda will be all right," he heard himself say. He could hear her laughing in the kitchen. Stop. This is completely different from what everybody thinks Mr. Martin does. This is where he's going outside of his box. And he tells her, "Yeah, give me a scotch and a soda." And then she goes and she gets it. So good. Check this out. Mr. Martin looked quickly around the living room for the weapon. He had counted on finding one there. There were andirons and a poker and something in a corner that looked like an Indian club. None of them would do. It couldn't be that way. He began to pace around. He came to the desk. On it lay a metal paper knife with an ornate handle. Would it be sharp enough? He reached for it and knocked over a small brass jar. Stamps spilled out all over it, and it fell to the board with a clatter that should be floor. "Hey," Miss Barrows yelled from the kitchen. "Are you tearing up the pea patch?" Mr. Martin gave a strange laugh, picking up the knife. He tried its point against his left wrist. It was blunt. It wouldn't do. When Miss Barrows reappeared carrying 2 highballs, Mr. Martin, standing there with his gloves on, became acutely conscious of the fantasy he had wrought. Cigarettes in his pocket, a drink prepared for him. It was all too grossly improbable. It was more than that. It was impossible. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a vague idea sprouted. "For heaven's sake, take off those gloves," said Miss Barrows. "I always wear them in the house," said Mr. Martin. The idea began to bloom, strange and wonderful. She put the glasses on the coffee table in front of the sofa and sat on the sofa. "Come over here, you odd little man," she said. Mr. Martin went over and sat beside her. It was difficult getting a cigarette out of the pack of Camels, but he managed it. She held a match out for him, laughing. "Well," she said, handing him his drink, "this is perfectly marvelous. You with a drink and a cigarette." Stop. I think Mr. Martin totally had an idea of what he was going to do when he got there. But I think he kind of lost his nerve. And I think he couldn't find the right stuff that he needed. So I think he had to kind of change things around. And he's kind of just winging it now. But we'll see what happens. Here we go. Mr. Martin puffed, not too awkwardly. He took a gulp of the highball. "I drink and smoke all the time," he said. He clinked his glass against hers. "Here's nuts that I will windbag Fitweiler," he said, and gulped again. The stuff tasted awful, but he made no grimace. "Really, Mr. Martin," she said, her voice and posture changing. "You are insulting our employer." Mr. Barrows was now all special advisor to the president. "I am preparing a bomb," said Mr. Martin, which will blow the old goat higher than hell. He had only had a little of the drink, which was not strong. It couldn't be that. "Do you take dope or something?" Miss Barrows asked coldly. "Heroin," said Mr. Martin. "I'll be coked to the gills when I bump that old buzzard off." "Mr. Martin," she shouted, getting to her feet, "that will be all of that. You must go at once." Mr. Martin took another swallow of his drink. He tapped the cigarette out in the ashtray and he put the pack of Camels on the coffee table. Then he got up. She stood glaring at him. He walked over and put out his hat and coat. "Not a word about this," he said, and laid an index finger against his lips. All Miss Barrows could bring out was, "Really?" Mr. Martin put his hand on the doorknob. "I'm sitting in the catbird seat," he said. He stuck his tongue out at her and left. Nobody saw him go. Stop. All right, so this is what's crazy. He goes and he starts talking crazy. Like he lights a cigarette and he starts drinking and he's talking to her about the old man. And he's like, "Yeah, the old man's full of it and I've got a bomb for him. I'm going to drop this on him. And when I do it, I'm going to be coked up and it's going to be great." And he's like crazy. He's like talking crazy. So the lady's like, "Oh my gosh, no, you got to get out of here. No, I'm not going to have anybody talk about the boss like that. You wait." And then right before he leaves, he smashes out the cigarette and he looks at her and he says to her, "I'm sitting in the catbird seat." Now, if you think back, remember, sitting in the catbird seat means like you're in a good position, right? It means like you've got everything angled out. You've got everything mapped out. Everything is perfect. Everything is good. And then he sticks his tongue out at her as if to say, "And what?" Right? And then he leaves. And it's great because it's kind of like his like way he gets to be mean to her, and he says all this stuff that he wants to say, and he acts crazy, and then he just tells her, "Oh well," and he leaves. So check this out.